Not everyone is who they claim to be. In fact, some wear their masks so convincingly for so long that even they begin to forget where the act ends and the person begins. They don't lie with malice, they lie with habit. And the most dangerous deception isn't in what they hide, it's in what they repeat with a smile. Fake people are not always loud. They're not always easy to spot. Sometimes they come dressed as charm, with polished words, soft tones, and phrases that sound innocent until you look deeper. But the Stoics taught us this. Words reveal patterns, and when you listen without illusion, even the most practiced manipulator will eventually slip. Because the tongue, as Epictetus might say, often betrays what the soul is trying to conceal. This video is not about judging others quickly. It's about learning to see through the performance. To stop being impressed by personality and start observing behavior. Because the Stoic does not take words at face value, he studies the intention beneath them. He listens not just to what is said, but to what is being protected, disguised, or deflected. So listen closely. These are 7 phrases fake people often use, and what they really mean beneath the mask. Each one is subtle. Each one is a red flag dressed in casual language. And once you learn to recognize them, you'll never unsee them again. Let's begin. 1. I'm just being honest. No, they're being rude and calling it honesty. There is a distinct difference between truth and ego, and one of the clearest signs of a dishonest person isn't that they lie, it's that they twist the truth into a weapon, sharpened not by integrity, but by their need to control how they're perceived. When someone says, I'm just being honest, what they often mean is, I'm going to say something offensive, possibly cruel, and I don't want to be held responsible for the damage it causes. It's not honesty, it's emotional camouflage. The Stoics valued truth, yes, but they valued self-mastery more. And the highest form of honesty to a Stoic was never brutal. It was measured, tempered, and most importantly, delivered for the sake of clarity, not control. When a person feels compelled to preface their statement with, I'm just being honest, it usually means they are aware of the harm their words might cause. They're aware it might land like a slap rather than a revelation. But instead of choosing silence, refinement, or a better moment, they rush forward and justify their lack of emotional discipline as a virtue. But let's be clear. Honesty without compassion is aggression. It is not a sign of strength to speak whatever comes to mind. It is a sign of weakness, of a person ruled by impulse rather than reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." So when someone uses honesty to perform a subtle injury, through sarcasm, passive aggression, or blunt cruelty, the Stoic does not mirror it. He sees it for what it is, a person trying to dominate the space by framing their harshness as truth. Genuine honesty, the kind the Stoics respected, does not need a warning label. It speaks quietly. It seeks resolution, not domination. It waits for the right moment and delivers itself with respect, even when the truth is difficult. But fake people? They use the word honesty like a shield to protect their pride from being challenged, and as a sword to injure others while pretending they're just keeping it real. This kind of false honesty is seductive because it appears strong. It appears unfiltered, bold, courageous. But true courage is not in saying everything that crosses your mind. It's in knowing what should be said, when, how, and to whom. The Stoics didn't admire those who exploded with their opinions. They admired those who had the power to speak, and still chose restraint. So when someone says, I'm just being honest, pay close attention. Are they offering truth, or just hiding their cruelty inside it? Are they creating clarity, or are they feeding on your discomfort to elevate their own self-image? You'll often notice that fake people speak harsh truths publicly, not privately. They say it loud enough for others to hear. Because the real motive isn't to inform you, it's to assert superiority in front of an audience. It's theater disguised as truth-telling, and that's where the Stoic draws the line. He may speak hard truths, but never for attention, never for dominance, never to look strong at someone else's expense. If your words leave you feeling superior and others feeling small, you're not being honest. You're being performative. Honesty doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't hide behind disclaimers. It stands on its own, clear, quiet, firm, and rooted in principle. The next time someone says, "Don't take it personally, I'm just being honest," understand that phrase says more about their lack of refinement than your capacity to receive truth. And in that moment, you don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. You only need to see clearly, because the Stoic knows real truth doesn't seek attention. It simply endures. 2. Don't take it the wrong way. They know it's wrong. That's why they said it. There are few phrases as revealing and as manipulative as the subtle disclaimer, "Don't take it the wrong way." Because almost always, the person speaking it knows exactly how it will land. They know the comment carries edge, sting, or insult. They know it may offend, unsettle, or provoke, and yet they say it anyway, not out of courage, but out of calculation. And then they attempt to soften the blow, not by altering the content, but by shifting the responsibility for how it's received. This is the sleight of hand. Instead of owning the weight of their words, they place the burden on you. If you're offended, that's your fault, not mine. If this stings, it's because you're too sensitive, not because I lacked tact. It's a deflection dressed as diplomacy. The Stoics, however, were precise about speech. To them, words were tools, not weapons, not props, not escape hatches. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by things, but by the opinions we form about them, and therefore we must be careful in how we express those opinions, because when words are shaped carelessly, they breed confusion, and when they're delivered with passive disclaimers, they become cowardly acts of aggression. "Don't take it the wrong way" is a phrase often used to give oneself permission to cross a line while appearing polite. It's not an expression of consideration. It's a shield used to protect the speaker from being held accountable. And in the world of the Stoic, accountability is everything. You own your thoughts. You own your words. You own the effects they have. A person who genuinely values clarity doesn't hide behind disclaimers. They speak with intent. They speak with care. And if something has the potential to be misunderstood, they do not place that misunderstanding on the listener. They take the time to express themselves more skillfully. Fake people, by contrast, deploy phrases like "don't take it the wrong way" as a smokescreen for emotional irresponsibility. And it's not just the words they use, it's the context in which they arrive. Notice how often this phrase comes before a jab, a dig, a subtle insult wrapped in concern. It's the linguistic equivalent of throwing a stone and then saying, "I hope you don't bruise easily." It's not consideration, it's control. The Stoic does not speak to manipulate emotion, he speaks to illuminate truth. And when he sees that truth may be difficult to receive, he does not push forward with false disclaimers. He asks himself whether his words are necessary, whether they are helpful, and whether they reflect his inner alignment with reason. Because speech in the eyes of the Stoic is never neutral, it either builds clarity or feeds confusion. The one who says "don't take it the wrong way" is often very aware of what they're doing. It is not ignorance, it is strategy. They want to say something controversial while preemptively dodging the consequences. It's a soft form of manipulation, a passive-aggressive maneuver that masquerades as concern. But concern, real concern, doesn't require disclaimers. It doesn't require emotional escape routes. It requires presence, patience, and the courage to speak with full ownership. So when you hear this phrase, listen not to the words that follow, but to the pattern behind them. Ask yourself, if this person truly cared about how their message would be received, would they say it at all? Would they rephrase it, reconsider it, or rethink whether it needs to be said in the first place? Because the Stoic speaks not to impress, not to provoke, and certainly not to hide behind politeness. He speaks when truth demands it, and when silence would be a form of dishonesty. And when he speaks, he does not apologize for the integrity of his words, because he made sure they were spoken with care in the first place. So the next time someone says, "Don't take it the wrong way," remember, the Stoic does not react. He simply observes. Because words spoken with disclaimers are rarely innocent, and a person who truly meant well wouldn't need to say it at all. 3. You can trust me. Trust isn't spoken. It's proven. There's something suspicious, almost performative, about someone who insists on their own trustworthiness. You can trust me, they say with urgency, as if those words alone should override your intuition, your caution, your previous experiences. But the truth is, trust is never something that needs to be declared by those who actually deserve it. Real trustworthiness does not demand recognition. It simply behaves in a way that makes recognition inevitable. The Stoics were clear. Don't tell people who you are, show them through disciplined action. To the Stoic, the person who loudly proclaims their loyalty, honesty, or integrity is often masking a deeper instability, a need to be seen as good rather than to simply be good. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, don't waste time talking about what a good man is. Be one. This principle applies doubly to trust, because the more urgently someone asks for it, the more we must ask why. Fake people use trust as a prop. They evoke it not to uphold a standard, but to bypass scrutiny. They say, trust me, at the very moment when they sense your suspicion, and instead of offering evidence, consistency, or character, they offer empty assurance. It's not trust they're really after. It's control over your perception of them. But trust is not a performance. It is not something that blossoms under pressure or grows in the shadow of self-promotion. Trust is built in silence, in unseen moments, in follow-through, in patterns of behavior so consistent that they speak louder than any promise ever could. The Stoic does not ask to be trusted. He simply lives in a way that removes the need for reassurance. Because when your actions align with your principles, when your word matches your behavior, when your presence remains steady regardless of circumstance, people feel they can trust you without needing to be told. And that feeling is far more powerful, far more enduring than any verbal claim. So when someone says, you can trust me, listen carefully, not just to their words, but to the timing. Why now? Why this moment? Are they offering truth or trying to disarm your skepticism? Oftentimes those who betray you won't do it with a snarl or a warning. They'll do it with charm, with a smile, with a phrase designed to make you lower your guard just enough. And in that small window of borrowed trust, the damage is done. The Stoics didn't advise paranoia. They didn't walk through life assuming the worst in everyone. But they did believe in observation, in pattern, in time-tested character over charisma. They believed that if you needed to say something constantly, perhaps it wasn't true consistently. And that includes trust. Words can be manipulated. Intentions can be faked. But behavior over time, that is the one thing that remains stubbornly honest. Because when life becomes inconvenient, when masks begin to crack, when pressure reveals who someone actually is, you don't need to ask if they're trustworthy. You'll already know. So remember, trust isn't something you hand over at the sound of a promise. It's something you build slowly, carefully through observation. And those who truly respect you, those who live with integrity, won't need to say, you can trust me. They'll simply give you no reason to doubt. The Stoic doesn't rely on charm. He doesn't dress himself in borrowed virtues. He doesn't speak of loyalty. He becomes loyal. And when he does speak, he speaks with such clarity, such simplicity, that the listener feels no pressure to trust. Only the quiet certainty that trust has already grown, silently, between them. 4. I'm not dramatic, but chaos seems to follow them everywhere. There is a certain irony in those who declare themselves free from drama, yet seem to carry it with them like a shadow. They say it casually with a practiced smile, I'm not dramatic. And yet, everywhere they go, tension blooms. Small conflicts turn into spirals. Simple misunderstandings become emotional storms. And if you look closely, the common denominator is not circumstance, it's them. The Stoics taught that peace is not a condition of the environment, it is a discipline of the inner world. And a person who is truly calm, truly centered, has no need to declare it. Their life reflects it. Their presence communicates it without noise, without defense, without disclaimers. Because for the Stoic, stillness is a practice, not a personality trait. And anyone who needs to say they avoid drama is, more often than not, deeply entangled in it. Fake people use phrases like, "I'm not dramatic," as preemptive shields. It's a way of shaping your perception of them before you have the chance to observe for yourself. It's marketing, not reality. They try to control the narrative because they know, consciously or not, that their behavior often contradicts the calm image they're trying to sell. But drama is not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It hides in passive aggression, in indirect communication, in the constant need to be at the emotional center of every interaction. It shows up in how they respond to boundaries. Do they respect your silence, or do they pull you into their storm? It shows up when they feel excluded. Do they sit with their discomfort, or do they ignite suspicion among others to feel significant again? The Stoic doesn't need to be the center of attention, nor does he avoid responsibility when tension arises. He doesn't create storms and then act surprised when it rains. He moves through conflict when necessary, with calm precision, not by denying it but by refusing to be swallowed by it. When someone says, "I hate drama," but is always surrounded by it, the Stoic mind asks a simple question. Are they the victim of chaos or the architect of it? Because many people secretly crave the emotional volatility they claim to despise. It makes them feel alive. It gives them a sense of importance. And more dangerously, it gives them control over those who are addicted to peace and too afraid to challenge tension directly. The true Stoic avoids drama, not because he fears discomfort, but because he values clarity. He would rather speak plainly than gossip. He would rather resolve in one sentence what others stretch across weeks of passive conflict. He understands that unnecessary emotion is a tax on the mind, and he refuses to pay it. A fake person will often use "I'm not dramatic" the same way they use every other self-label, as a costume, a preloaded defense, so that when their behavior contradicts the image, they can point back to their words and say, "See, that's not who I am." But the Stoic knows that who you are is revealed not in what you say, but in what you repeat when no one is looking. And if chaos follows you everywhere, it is not the world that needs calming, it is you. So listen not to the denial. Watch the patterns. Do they listen more than they speak? Do they remain steady in tension? Or do they fan the flames with subtle remarks and exaggerated emotions? Do they own their feelings, or do they weaponize them? Because peace is not declared, it is demonstrated. And stillness doesn't beg to be believed, it is felt. In the end, the Stoic doesn't argue about being calm. He simply lives in a way that makes it unmistakable. And when he walks into a room, the temperature drops, not because he silences others, but because he does not bring chaos with him. 5. You're overreacting. Translation: I won't take accountability. Few phrases silence a person faster than the accusation of being too emotional. It's swift, it's dismissive, and it places the blame not on the speaker's behavior, but on the listener's response. You're overreacting, they say, not to understand you, but to escape from the responsibility of looking at themselves. Because if they can redefine your reaction as irrational, they no longer have to reflect on what caused it in the first place. This phrase is not about truth, it's about control. It reframes the entire situation so that the issue is no longer what they did, but how you felt about it. And in doing so, they reposition themselves as the calm, reasonable one, while you're painted as unstable, dramatic, or weak. But make no mistake, this is not emotional clarity, it's manipulation wrapped in language. The Stoics taught us that our emotions are not the enemy, but they must be examined, not erased. When someone reacts to something, the Stoic mind does not immediately label it as weakness. Instead, it asks, what is this response revealing? Is there truth behind the anger? Is there something being violated beneath the surface? An expectation, a boundary, a principle? Because not every intense emotion is an overreaction. Sometimes it's the first honest signal that something is wrong, and those who rush to call it too much are often the very ones unwilling to face that truth. Fake people are masters at this kind of emotional redirection. They don't deny what they did. They simply make your reaction the problem. It's a subtle way of turning accountability into accusation, and the phrase, "you're overreacting," becomes a mirror turned back on you, distorting the entire experience until you begin to doubt your own clarity. But the Stoic does not gaslight. He does not hide behind rhetoric or escape into clever phrasing. If someone is hurt by his words or actions, he does not dismiss them. He listens. He examines the situation not to defend his ego, but to pursue justice within himself. Because to the Stoic, the goal is not to avoid blame. It is to understand where truth resides, even if it's inconvenient. When a person instantly calls you irrational, they are revealing their intolerance for discomfort. They don't want to see themselves as the cause of someone else's pain, so they choose the faster route, discredit the pain altogether. But real strength lies not in avoiding the discomfort of responsibility, but in facing it with dignity. The Stoic is willing to admit fault without crumbling. He does not fear being wrong, because his identity is not built on the illusion of perfection. And here's the paradox. Those who quickly call others too emotional are often the least emotionally regulated themselves. They speak from irritation, they react from defensiveness. And they use the language of logic to hide their inability to sit with the impact of their own behavior. So what do you do when someone says, "You're overreacting"? The Stoic answer is not to shout louder, not to retaliate, not to spiral into self-doubt. You pause, you breathe. You observe the intent behind their words, and most importantly, you remember that your experience does not require their permission to be valid. You can examine your emotion without erasing it. You can explore your response without discarding your boundaries, because your reaction may indeed be intense, but that does not mean it's unjustified. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is hold your ground, not to fight, but to refuse the invitation to question your reality. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that people would behave irrationally and that his job was not to control them, but to remain anchored within himself. Let this be your reminder too. The next time someone uses the phrase, "you're overreacting," hear the subtext, "I won't take responsibility." And let their refusal to reflect be all the clarity you need to stay grounded in your own. Because in the end, the Stoic does not need the world to validate his perception. He validates it through stillness, reflection, and the refusal to abandon truth in the face of someone else's denial. 6. I'd never lie to you. Unprovoked. That's a red flag. When someone feels the need to declare without prompt or pressure, "I'd never lie to you," it should not automatically bring comfort. It should stir attention. Because in most cases, truth does not announce itself. Integrity does not market its presence. And honesty, when it's real, reveals itself slowly through consistency, not through sudden declarations. The Stoics taught us that character is something demonstrated, not advertised. A virtuous person does not insist on their virtue. They live it even in silence. They don't tell you how honest they are, because they understand that virtue becomes cheap the moment it requires performance. And the more someone insists on their own honesty, especially without being asked, the more likely they are trying to manage your perception, not express a principle. Fake people use phrases like, "I'd never lie to you," the same way magicians use distraction. It's not about the words, it's about what they don't want you to notice. It's a way of preloading trust, of emotionally disarming you, so that if and when deception does occur, your guard has already been lowered. It's not a confession of integrity, it's a manipulation of your expectations. Marcus Aurelius didn't walk through life trying to prove his virtue to others. He reminded himself daily to act according to his principles, regardless of praise or blame. This is what makes a Stoic trustworthy, not their insistence, but their alignment. When a Stoic says something, he means it, not because he needs to be believed, but because he refuses to say anything he does not stand behind. So when someone looks you in the eye and says, "I'd never lie to you," ask yourself, why now? Why that phrase in that moment with that tone? Was there any suspicion? Was there any question? Or did they offer this phrase unprovoked, like a preemptive alibi for behavior not yet visible? Because here's the truth. Honest people don't talk about how honest they are. They don't need to. They let time, actions, and consistency speak louder than their promises. And when they make mistakes, which they inevitably will, they don't hide behind language. They don't try to cushion it with charm. They take full responsibility without needing to paint themselves as innocent. On the other hand, fake people use honesty as a tool for image management. They present themselves as trustworthy before trust has even been tested. They say, "I'd never lie," in the same way they say, "You can trust me," or "I'm not like the others." Not because it's true, but because it's strategic. It's a shield they can later hide behind if things begin to unravel. They'll say, "You can't seriously believe I'd lie to you. I told you I wouldn't." But the Stoic doesn't operate that way. He understands that speech is not a substitute for character. He knows that anyone can say the right thing once. What matters is how they act when no one's watching, when trust is inconvenient, when the easy path would be to bend the truth ever so slightly to avoid conflict or consequence. So the next time someone tells you, "I'd never lie to you," without being asked, pause, observe. Don't get distracted by the comfort of the phrase. Watch what follows, because the Stoic trusts what is earned, not what is declared. And if someone feels the need to insist on their truthfulness, it may be because their behavior has already begun to contradict it. In the end, trust is not something you're given. It's something you build. And anyone who tries to rush that process with charming phrases or rehearsed promises is not trying to connect with you. They're trying to control your perception of them. The Stoic watches patterns. He doesn't fall for performances. And above all, he knows that truth needs no defense, because when you live by principle, honesty doesn't need to be said out loud. It becomes impossible to miss. 7. I'm different. Real people don't say it. They show it. There is something deeply revealing about a person who needs to announce their uniqueness. I'm not like everyone else. I'm different. I'm built differently. These phrases may sound confident on the surface, but listen closely, and you'll often hear the tremble beneath them, not strength, not clarity, but a quiet desperation to be perceived as special without yet having endured what true distinction requires. Consistency, principle, and the refusal to betray yourself in the face of convenience. When someone tells you they're different, what they're often doing is asking you to believe something they haven't yet proven. They are attempting to separate themselves from the masses, not through action but through declaration. It's branding, not being, performance, not presence. And in the Stoic worldview, no amount of verbal self-definition can replace the quiet authority of a life lived in alignment with virtue. The Stoics never needed to say they were different, because everything about their conduct made it clear. They were disciplined when others were impulsive. They were silent when others were reactive. They stood still while the crowd chased status and approval, and they did not need to distance themselves from everyone else through words, because the way they carried themselves made comparison unnecessary. To say, "I'm different," is often a sign that someone has not yet become who they claim to be. It is a placeholder, a request, an unearned badge that seeks to shortcut the long road of character development. Because real uniqueness, real inner distinction, doesn't require attention. It doesn't ask for recognition. It simply becomes undeniable over time. Fake people, however, need constant affirmation. They want to be seen as the exception, not because they've mastered anything, but because being ordinary terrifies them. And rather than face that fear with humility and growth, they coat it with self-praise. They speak of how loyal they are, how rare they are, how deep they are. But people who are truly loyal don't need to promise it. People who are truly rare don't feel the need to explain why. People who are truly deep are too busy thinking carefully to narrate their own depth. The Stoic walks differently, not because he's trying to appear unique, but because he refuses to compromise his inner architecture just to be liked. He doesn't blend in when blending would mean dishonesty. He doesn't follow the crowd when the crowd moves away from reason. And he doesn't need to remind anyone that he's not like the rest, because he's not focused on others. He's focused on self-mastery. So when someone says, "I'm different," ask yourself, have they earned that statement? Have they endured the kind of inner conflict that transforms talk into transformation? Have they chosen the harder path, consistently, quietly, without applause? Because the world is full of people who say they're not like the rest. But very few can stand in the fire of temptation, chaos, and ego and walk out unchanged. The Stoic doesn't self-proclaim. He doesn't need to say he's rare, valuable, or different. He simply becomes someone others recognize as solid, unshakable, and quietly rare. Not because he wants the label, but because he's built a life that cannot be imitated by those who are only performing. So let them talk. Let them say how unique they are. Let them decorate their image with words like real, loyal, genuine. The Stoic says nothing. He simply watches. And over time, the difference becomes so clear, it no longer needs to be spoken. Because real people don't tell you they're different. They make it impossible to confuse them with anyone else. The words people use reveal more than they intend. Beneath charm, beneath casual phrases, beneath the polished tone of rehearsed sincerity, there are clues. Because in the Stoic view, character is not declared. It leaks through habits, through timing, through the things people say when they think you're not really listening. Fake people hide behind language. They dress manipulation as honesty. They confuse performance with presence. And most dangerously, they use words to disarm your instincts, making you question your reactions, your clarity, your boundaries. But the Stoic listens differently. He doesn't react to tone. He watches patterns. He doesn't need dramatic proof. He looks for quiet inconsistency. And he knows that real character doesn't defend itself with speeches. It stands firm, even in silence. So remember, loyalty doesn't scream. It whispers in small, consistent actions. Truth doesn't beg to be believed. It simply refuses to contradict itself over time. And people worth trusting won't need to convince you with words. They'll let their integrity speak in the spaces between them. Watch what people do. Watch how they move when no one's applauding. Because in the end, it's not what someone says that tells you who they are. It's what they keep repeating, especially when they think you're not paying attention. If you found value in this, subscribe for more wisdom that cuts deeper than language. And walk through the world not with suspicion, but with clarity. Because once you learn to see through words, you stop being fooled by noise and start living by principle.